We have a saying around here, and the saying goes that you all should exercise as if life depended upon it. You should exercise as if life depended upon it. And there's two really great reasons why that's true. Okay? Now the first reason, and I'm not going to give you an exercise physiology lecture, but know that when the human body exercises regularly over time, the body starts to change. We call it physiological adaptation. And all that means is that when you put the regular load of exercise on your body, we start to see changes in the blood vessels, we start to see changes in the muscle cells, and we start to see changes in the metabolism. And all these changes kind of tune up the cardiovascular system. So remember from lecture 1, the number one job of your heart is to deliver oxygen, right? And so this makes your heart more efficient at delivering oxygen, makes your muscles more efficient at utilizing the oxygen. And what that means is that your heart doesn't have to work as hard. Whether you're totally at rest or whether you're stressing yourself with exercise, your heart won't have to work so hard. Is that a good thing? Yes. But the second and more compelling reason why everyone should exercise as if their life depended upon it is because of what happens to the risk factors as a result of regular exercise. Now, these 7 risk factors on the board should look familiar to you. These are the controllable risk factors, right? These are the ones that we can change, we can have an impact on. And what we know is if we really aggressively intervene on the risk factors, we can impact the course of the plaque, of the disease. Okay? So, number 7 on here, sedentary. If you start and maintain an exercise program, what happens to risk factor 7? It's gone. It's gone. Number 6, stress. Have any of you noticed an elevation in mood after you exercise? You feel more relaxed, all that kind of thing? Now, there are 2 major emotional challenges that almost all patients face, and their families face, after a cardiac event. And we're going to talk about these in detail next week when we have the stress talk. But the 2 biggies for patients and their families are anxiety. People become very anxious after a cardiac event. And what we've known for a long time is that exercise can be a treatment for depression. We can actually lower what they call state anxiety for about 6 to 8 hours with exercise. So if you're having a day when you feel like you're going to jump out of your skin, go work out, and you will feel much more relaxed. The second emotional challenge for almost everyone is depression. People get blue after a cardiac event. And again, what we've known for a long time is that we can treat depression with exercise. As a matter of fact, we have gotten clinically depressed people off antidepressant medication by putting them on exercise programs. Okay? So, can exercise help with stress? Yeah, absolutely. Overweight, can exercise help you lose weight? That's kind of a no-brainer. But remember that the kind of exercise or the kind of weight loss we're talking about here is slow and steady. It's not those fast, crazy weight loss diets. And when you lose weight with exercise, it's very different than losing weight on a rapid weight loss plan like a fast. Because when you lose weight really quickly, what are you losing a lot of? And what else? Muscle. And what we're trying to do is give you a healthier body composition. Your body's made up of fat and muscle, and what we want to do is get a healthier composition with more muscle and less fat. Does that happen with exercise? Yes. Okay? So that's what we're looking for. Diabetes. Aaron probably talked about blood sugar and exercise. What happens to blood sugar with exercise? It drops down. Remember that the damage that happens to the arteries with diabetes is when blood sugar gets too high. So anything that keeps blood sugars down into reasonable levels, whether it's insulin or pills or exercise, is a darn good thing. Cholesterol. Can exercise lower cholesterols? Yeah. And what we've seen is we've seen a lowering of total, a lowering of LDL, and an elevation of the protective HDL cholesterol with exercise. Blood pressure. Can exercise lower blood pressures? Yeah. And what we've seen is a lowering of systolic, the top number, and diastolic, the bottom number, by about 10 points with just exercise. Imagine if you were a person with a borderline blood pressure of like 130/90, you could essentially normalize your blood pressures doing nothing else but exercising. That's pretty compelling stuff. What about smoking? Can exercise help you stop smoking? No, I don't think so. I don't think so. But I think that exercise can give you something to do when you're having an urge. And what are the two things that people complain about most when they're trying to stop smoking? They complain about getting anxious and feeling blue. Can exercise help with those things? Yeah. So in a roundabout way, exercise certainly supports smoking cessation. So the bottom line going home teaching point is all of you, all of us, should exercise as if life depended upon it for two very compelling reasons. One is the physical changes that happen in the body as a result of regular exercise that serve your heart very well. And the second reason, and more important to me, is because of the benefit you get to the risk factors, which is what's going to intervene on this disease. Okay? So, because exercise is so important, we're going to spend the whole time talking about it today. And today, each and every one of you is going to leave here with your own exercise prescription. And it's my job today to explain to you what an exercise prescription is. It has 4 components to it. The first component, in exercise science, we call the mode of exercise. And what that means is I say to all of you that you all should exercise as if your life depended upon it. And the first question that needs to be asked is, well, what kind of exercise is the best? What kind of exercise is going to serve my cardiovascular and cardiorespiratory systems the most? Do you know what kind of exercise we're talking about?
Aerobic.
Yes. Aerobic exercise is the kind of exercise we're talking about. Now, aerobic exercise is a huge category of activity. Huge. And to make it an aerobic exercise, an aerobic activity, it only has to follow 3 rules. Okay? So the activity, first of all, has to be performed continuously. There's no stopping or starting with aerobic activity. It's got to be performed continuous. 2, the continuous activity you're doing must have a rhythmic to it, a rhythm. It must be rhythmic. So it's continuous and rhythmic. Now. Now, it's an activity I could do for a long, long time, continuously. It has rhythm. I could lead an orchestra like this. Do you think this is aerobic? Is this aerobic?
It has to raise your heart rate.
Ding. Okay, it has to raise your heart rate. So the third rule to make it an aerobic activity is whatever continuous, rhythmic motion you're doing must be performed with large muscle groups. So if I were to do this with my legs, I won't. But if I was going to do that with my legs, boom, my heart rate comes up and I start breathing. That makes it aerobic. Okay? So, keeping those principles in mind, give me some examples of aerobic exercise. Walking, yes.
Riding.
Bicycling, yes. Swimming, yes. Jogging, yes. Dancing. Water aerobics. Okay? Climbing stairs. Rowing. Cross-country skiing. Kind of getting it? Okay? All those activities are aerobic activities. Now, what do you think about golf? Is golf aerobic? What if you walk the course? What if you walk the course?
Towing your clubs, probably.
No, because it breaks a rule. What's the rule?
It's not rhythmic.
It's not continuous. It's not continuous, so it breaks that rule. But do you think that there's any cardiovascular benefit to golf? Well, we have to study these things, you know. So,
I'll go out this afternoon.
yeah. You let me know. So, Well, it turns out there were some researchers at the New Hampshire Heart Institute. And what they wanted to know is there indeed cardiovascular benefit to golfing. And so what they did was they studied a group of men only, by the way. I guess women don't golf. It's not a problem for me, really. But anyway, they studied a whole group of men who played 18 holes of golf, walking the course 3 times a week during the season. And what they found is these guys, 18 holes, walking the course 3 times a week, they dropped their total cholesterol, they dropped their LDL, the bad stuff, they elevated the protective good HDL cholesterol, and on average, these guys lost 4 pounds during the season without changing their diets. So is golf good for you? Sure. Is it aerobic? No. So it would be something you would do in addition to your aerobic exercise prescription. The same thing would hold for yoga. Yoga is fabulous, not aerobic. Something you would do in addition to your aerobic exercise prescription. That making sense? Okay, now, out of all those things we talked about, walking, jogging, running, swimming, bicycling, cross-country skiing, rowing, climbing stairs, all those things, dancing, out of all those things, which aerobic activity do you think we have discovered gives the most aerobic benefit, the most cardiovascular benefit from what? Walking, you think? Swimming? Any other ideas? You know what we discovered? The aerobic activity that gives the absolute most cardiovascular benefit is the one that you will do. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So the point is, it doesn't matter. Your heart is going to get the benefit. But you know what it may matter to? It may matter to your knees, or your hips, or your back, or your head. It may matter to those. So which aerobic activity do you choose? I don't know. What's the best for you? What feels the best to your body? What's the most convenient? What's the most affordable? Which one do you enjoy the most? That's the one you choose. And you know what? Every single person in here may choose something different. And you'd all be right for you. Okay? You'd all be right for you. And so think about this, because this aerobic prescription we're talking about is not just for rehab, not just till the end of rehab. This is for the rest of your life. So think about what's going to work for you, what's going to work for you. One of the things I've done is join a gym. Every time I go to the gym, I can do something different. That takes care of my joints, so I'm doing different stresses on my bones and my joints and my muscles, and it takes care of any boredom. I want to exercise for 55 more years. Okay? So think, what's going to work for you? Any question about what kind of exercise? All right. So the next part of your prescription, is called frequency. So you know what kind of exercise you need to do. Next question that should be answered is how often? How many days a week have you heard that you need to exercise to have benefit? What have you heard? 3. Anybody heard anything different? Every day. Anybody heard anything different?
Yeah, the gym instructor wants me to do 6 days a week.
Okay, yeah. So we get lots of different messages, and I think it makes it a little bit confusing. Now, just as you know, historically, many, many years ago, and for forever, we have been prescribing exercise for Americans. And in the 70s, they worked really hard at getting out a prescription. And the prescription was, see if you remember this, at that time, we want everyone, all Americans, to exercise for 20 minutes 3 times a week. Did you ever remember hearing that? Well, they do a lot of research and they collect a lot of data all the time on exercise trends with Americans. And it turned out in '95 they looked at 25 years of data. And what they found is even though we were talking till we were blue in the face about 20 minutes 3 times a day, over the course of that 25 years, Americans as a whole had become more sedentary and more obese. Nobody was following that prescription. So in 95, they changed it. Thank goodness they've changed it again, because in 95 I was furious. The prescription in 95 was, we want all Americans to do whatever they can to increase their activity. Park your car at the end of the parking lot. Take the stairs, that kind of thing. Do whatever you can. So by the end of the day, you've accumulated 30 minutes of moderate activity. Did you hear that? We were pumping on that for, a decade. Problems with that. Number one, are Americans going to do that? No. Okay. Number two, I think that as exercise professionals and health professionals, we have gotten to the point where we're desperate to get people off their butt. Excuse my French. Okay? And I think as a result, that prescription reflects this desperation, and it's a lowering of standards. You should never lower standards. Not in education, and sure as not when it comes to our health. But that's clearly what this was. And we've refined that a little bit now lately. But my primary problem with this prescription, and with the prescription currently, is that it blurs a distinction that's really critical to us in cardiac rehab. And that is the difference between fitness goals and health goals. Fitness goals and health goals. There is a difference. And I found a study that draws this line beautifully, and so I want to share this with you. This was an exercise study that was done with cardiac patients. So they all had known disease, so it makes it real applicable to us. All of the people in the study were men, by the way. I guess women don't get heart disease. It's not a problem for me. But anyway, what this was a 1-year exercise study. And so what they did was they had these guys chart how much exercise they were doing. At the end of the year, the men fell into 3 very distinct exercise categories. You could probably guess what these are. The sedentary group, those that really didn't do very much, the moderate exercisers, and the high exercisers. Now, in exercise science, what we do is we measure amount of activity in terms of calories burned. This is important. This is why I'm telling you this. The 3 groups, the sedentary group, when they looked at their data, they burned an average less than 1,000 calories a week in exercise, less than 1,000 calories a week. The moderate group, those moderate exercisers, they were averaging about a 1,500 calorie a week burn. And the big group, the high group, they burned more than 2,000 calories a week. This is important because I'm going to come back to this. They did 2 measurements on these men at the beginning of the study and the conclusion. The 2 measurements were, 1, a treadmill test. How many of you have taken a treadmill test? Anybody? Okay, yeah. Now there's a couple of reasons to take treadmill tests. One is you can do it with your doctor. And you go in and your doctor hooks you up to all the stuff and he puts you on the treadmill and he works you like a little dog. And what he's looking for to see if there's any heart problems. It's a diagnostic treadmill. But in the exercise lab, we do treadmill tests all the time. And what happens is we bring the subject, we hook them all up, and we speed it up and incline it, speed it up and incline it, speed it up and incline it, and pretty soon the subject screams uncle, and we can quantify how much work that person can do. Okay, that's a fitness evaluation. So we're determining their functional capacity. So what they did was they did a fitness evaluation on every single guy at the beginning of the year and the end of the year. They also did an angiogram. Case could say angiogram. Okay, remember when they go up through the groin or they go in through the arm and they can look at your heart arteries? Okay, they did that to every single person in the study, beginning and end. Pretty cool study, huh? The results were interesting. Some predictable, some very intriguing. Now, when we looked at the fitness data, the treadmill data, the results were predictable in that as you looked at the results of the exit treadmill for these different groups, the more exercise they did, the better they did on their exit treadmill. Predictable, right? And what we saw was the men in the moderate group, the moderate exercisers, they improved on their last treadmill test, and they improved by an average of 7%. It is 7% better at the end of the year. This group improved as well, and they improved by 14%. They did really better on their exit treadmill. What surprised me a little bit was what happened to the sedentary group. On their exit treadmill, they did not improve. But what was interesting was they didn't even do the same. What was interesting was they, on average, lost 8% of their function. And I think that that's a pretty important point, because there might be some misunderstanding that sedentary people are just kind of staying the same over time, and they're not at all. Sedentary people, if you don't move your body, you might be losing up to 8% of your functional status per year. That's huge. That is huge. But as intriguing as I find these results, what I'm more interested in is the results of the angiogram. The angiogram data. Aren't you more interested in that? Now, the angiogram data. When we looked at the angiograms of the men in the sedentary group, what we found is at the end of the year, their angiograms were worse. Now, that shouldn't surprise anybody in here, because what's the one absolute truth we know about coronary artery disease? It's progressive, right? It gets worse over time. That's just the nature of the beast. And so indeed, we saw that the group that was sedentary, their disease progressed a little over the course of the year. When we looked at the angiograms of the moderate exercisers, their angiograms at the end of the year were virtually identical. So what these researchers demonstrated is with a moderate degree of exercise, these men stopped the course of disease. They stabilized their plaque. Guess what happened to the angiograms in the men in the highest group? What do you think we found?
Plaque disappearing, ejection fraction going
We saw reversal of plaque, regression of disease. Okay? Now this is a difference to me between fitness goals and health goals. In rehab, I know we're asking you to exercise a lot. I know that. We're asking a lot of you. And our goals in asking you to exercise as much as we are not particularly that you get fit. Okay? Our goals in asking you to exercise is that we impact disease. And if you get fit in the process, which you will, by the way, that's just kind of a dandy side benefit. Okay? The goal is to impact disease. Okay? Now, what we consider to be a good chunk of change in terms of exercise is a 300-calorie burn. That's considered to be a good chunk of change. So if we were looking at these guys, this men in this moderate group, they were exercising 5 times a week. The high group, 7 times a week. Okay? So, since our goal is to impact disease in good conscience, how many days a week are we going to ask you to exercise?
7.
Okay? Now, why didn't I say 5 to 6, 5 to 7? Why didn't I say that? Because of human nature. You all know human nature, right?
Yeah.
So if I ask you guys to shoot for 5 or 6 days a week of exercise, in 6 months, how many are you going to get in?
5 days.
Maybe.
Or 4.
Or 3. Okay? And that may not be enough to do what our goals are. If I ask you all to shoot for 7 days a week of exercise, and you end up averaging 5 or 6, we may be in the ballpark of doing something fabulous. Okay? So, 7 times a week. Now, there should be one more question in all of your minds.
How long?
Nope, not that. I'll get to that. Okay? You're a nice show for me. The question is, How am I going to know how many calories I'm burning? Don't you want to know that? Well, there are two ways. One is every single machine, exercise machine that's made these days, is designed so you can punch in your weight and it will calculate for you how many calories you're burning according to your workload and your duration on the machine. Okay? So start doing that. Very important that you punch in your weight because all machines are calibrated for a 150-pound person. So if you weigh more than that, then you're totally cheating yourself in calories burned. Okay? So do punch in your weight. And get an idea what it takes to burn calories. What is a 300-calorie workout? Okay? If you're not using machines and you're walking outdoors, a rule of thumb is 1 mile, 100 calories. 1 mile, 100 calories. Now, that again is calculated on a person who weighs 150. So if you weigh more than that, you're burning a few more calories per mile. If you weigh less than that, you're burning a few less calories per mile. Don't even worry about it. Just figure 100 calories per mile. That also is affected by speed. You know, if you run a mile, you're burning more calories than a person who's strolling a mile. You know, but 100 calories a mile. Just kind of calculate that. That's how it works. Okay? Questions? No? Okay, the next part of your prescription you know what kind of exercise you need to do. You know how often you need to do it. How hard? How do you guide how hard you push yourself? You guys are out exercising on your own. What are you using to judge intensity? How hard to go? Heart rate?
A little sign you put up on
How you feel. Correct. Okay? That's the only two ways to judge intensity. Heart rate or how you feel. That's all we've got. Now, years ago, there used to be a big hullabaloo about heart rate. And if you remember, we called it training heart rate. And if you went to a gym, they'd have posters saying, find your training heart rate, take 220, subtract your age, multiply by blah, blah, blah. Remember all that? Well, that has fallen out of favor for a lot of reasons. One is that we found that more than a third of the population is incapable of finding their pulse. Problem. The other problem is that I'm really good at taking a pulse. So say I'm out on a run and I think, wonder what my pulse is. Can't do it when I'm moving. I have to stop. So I stop, I find my pulse, I find my watch, I stand there. What's happening to my pulse? Well, it's not going to be real accurate, is it? Okay? So either people can't find it, or when they do find it, it may not be 100% accurate. And the third and the primary reason why we do not use pulse in a cardiac population is because of a medication called beta blocker. Toprol, atenolol, tenormin, beta-pace, sotalol, it goes on and on and on and on. Beta blockers are given to every single person who has angina. Every single person after a heart attack or after a stent. Every single person after heart surgery. They're wonderful cardioprotective drugs, but they're strong. They slow down your heart rate, they lower your blood pressure, they control arrhythmias, they control angina, and not only are they strong, they wash out of your system pretty quickly. So here's the scenario. I want a training heart rate. How do you get one? Well, the best way is to take a treadmill test. And they hook you up to things, and they're looking for this physiological point they call a threshold, and around that heart rate, that's where you're getting the most benefit. So I set myself up for a treadmill test. I get up in the morning at 7 o'clock and I take my beta blocker. I come in at 1 in the afternoon for my treadmill test. And they hook me all up with my stuff, and they put me on the treadmill, and they work me like a little dog, and they figure out my threshold, and they figure out what I should do, and I say, thank you very much, and I leave. The next day I get up. I take my beta blocker at 7 a.m. I don't exercise at 1. I exercise at 9. I have more beta blocker in my blood than the previous day. Am I going to be able to get to my training heart rate? Maybe, if I've killed myself. Okay. Now the next day, I get up, I take my beta blocker at 7 a.m. I don't exercise till after work at 7 at night. I could be at my training heart rate sitting in a chair. Okay? I mean, that's an exaggeration. But the point is, because of the variability in heart rate response, depending on how much medication's in your blood at any one time, we don't shoot for heart rate. So, what are we left with? How you feel. How you feel. That chart. Okay, you all know that chart, right? The RPE chart, the rating of perceived exertion. So remember, that chart starts at 6. 6 is rest, right? Okay, and it goes to 20. 20 is like throw up hard, exhaustion, right? Okay, and then 11 to 13, 14, fairly light to somewhat hard. Look familiar? Look familiar? Look familiar? Okay. So, what we found by using this chart is that we bring people into the lab. We hook them up to all of our objective data. And we can analyze their carbon dioxide and oxygen exchange. We can analyze their blood. There's lots of ways we can objectively find this training threshold where people should exercise. And when we put them in the lab, hooked up, put them on the treadmills, when we saw that they crossed that threshold, we turn to the subject and say, how hard are you working right now? And do you know 99% of patients called out somewhere between 11 and 14. It happened with incredible consistency. When I was in college, I volunteered to be the subject for some reason. And they told me later that I had called out 12 when I crossed threshold. It really works. And so we know with a very, very, very high degree of confidence, if we get you exercising somewhere between fairly light and somewhat hard, you're at that physiological threshold where you're getting the most benefit. It's just been demonstrated too much. Now, of course, there are outliers to this rule. There are exceptions to this rule. I call them macho men. You know macho men, right? You put them on a treadmill, you get it going, you go, how hard are they working? And they go, 6. And you speed it up, put up a hill, and they go, 6. And you speed it up a higher hill, and they put it up the speed, and they're sweating like pigs, and they can't even breathe. And you go, how hard are you working now? And they go, 6. Okay. There are people like that in this world. Okay. There are patients like that that come into our gym. Do you know how hard we work them on that chart? 6. Because they don't understand. They're not conceptualizing this. Okay? There are other people at the other end of the continuum who are very frightened or very fragile, and you put them on a treadmill and they call out 17 and you haven't turned it on yet. Okay? There are patients like that, you know. So how hard do we work them? We work them at a 17. You know, they just don't get it. And I don't know if you remember your very first session in cardiac rehab. Your very first session in cardiac rehab, we explained the chart to you, and we asked you to tell us how hard you were working. Remember? We know what's going on. We got you on the monitor, okay? What we were doing was we were assessing your ability to use the chart, okay? And so if we have told you you're using it appropriately, trust that. You can trust that. And this is how we individualize our exercise. This chart is so great. If you remember, this is how we progress people. If you remember your very first time in cardiac rehab, how much work did you do? How did it feel? 12. How much work are you doing now? How does it feel? 12. That's how you should you're always shooting for that, always shooting for that. Okay? Now some people hate this chart. They say it's way too subjective. And so I have had patients say to me, you know what? You put me at 3 miles an hour on the treadmill in the gym. I'm going to go buy myself a treadmill, put myself at 3 miles an hour at home, And I don't need that stinking chart. And you know what? They're right today, because that's our job. Every time you come into the gym, we're supposed to be adjusting your threshold and showing you where you should exercise and how it should feel, right? So that's right today. But 6 months from now, when that person gets on their treadmill at 3 miles an hour, are they going to be at threshold? Probably not. And if today it feels like a 12 to them, how would it feel in 6 months? Would it still feel like a 12? Yeah, or a 7 or 8, something like that. So if the person was listening to their body, they'd know when it's time to turn up the heat. You will know that. When it starts feeling really easy, it's time to turn up the heat. Now, other people will say, here's another scenario. Every day I get on my treadmill at 3 miles an hour, and every day it feels like a 12. And today I'm at home on my treadmill at 3 miles an hour, and boy, for some reason it feels like a 16 or so. Should I just stay at that speed? Shouldn't I just push through it? It's what I do every day. Something's going on. Maybe you're overtraining, maybe you're catching a bug, maybe something's going on. Back it off until it feels appropriate. Okay? This works. This is a beautiful system that works. And now if you go to a reputable gym, they will have this scale on the wall, of the poster wall. No more heart rates. This is state of the art. And this is how it will be for the rest of your life. For the rest of your life, you will work somewhere between fairly light and somewhat hard. And this holds whether you're 5 years old or 95 years old. This is how you should exercise. Now, what may change over the course of your life, excuse me, it's falling down. What may change over the course of your life is your workload. But the exertion of it will always feel the same. So, how hard should you work? At a rating of perceived exertion somewhere between 11 and 14 for the rest of your life. Okay? Now there's one more part. This is for you. Time. How long? How long should you exercise? Okay? What do you think? How many minutes should you exercise? To get benefit?
30 minutes a day.
Yeah, okay. Could it be longer?
Yeah.
Could it be, how long?
You could walk for 2 hours as long as you felt okay.
Maybe. Could it be shorter?
It's more intense.
Well, the guidelines, just so you know, the guidelines are somewhere between 20 and 60 minutes. 20 and 60 minutes. And I certainly recognize that there are some of you that are not yet capable of exercising for 20 minutes continuously. I know that, okay? And this is kind of the goal by the end of rehab, 20 minutes, okay? And hopefully, by the end of rehab, most of you will be at the upper end of that limit, okay? Now, some people will say, hold on, Sharon, I've got horrible knees. I could never exercise for 60 minutes continuously. Could I do 2 30-minute sessions? What am I going to say?
Yeah.
Of course. Other people will say, hold on, Sharon, I've got 5 kids and 5 jobs. I could never exercise twice a day. Could I just do one longer session? What am I going to say?
Yes.
Of course. Okay? What works for you? What works for you? Now, talking about human nature, there are some people that think, well, if 20 minutes is pretty good, 60 minutes is way cool, then maybe 125,000 minutes would be even better than that. Okay? No, there are personalities like that. And so, of course, we've had to research that. And we've discovered that people that exercise more than 60 minutes continuously, they do get a squeak more cardiovascular benefit, but it comes at enormous cost. And the cost is we start seeing overuse injuries. They start getting hurt. Shin splints, knee pain, hip pain. If you get hurt, what happens to your exercise?
Stops.
It's out the window. Don't get hurt. The second thing that happens to people that exercise for more than 60 minutes on a regular basis happens up here. They start getting burned out. They don't look forward to it. They don't enjoy it. If you stop enjoying it, guess what happens to your exercise? It's out the window. There is a horrible statistic in exercise science, and that is, statistically speaking, purely, 50% of the people sitting in this room will not be exercising at all in 6 months. We have a 50% dropout from exercise programs of people who initiate them. And what I'm trying to advocate here is that exercise is too darned important for everybody in this room. We can't have even one of you be a dropout. Okay? So don't get crazy. Now, the exception to the rule, if any of you get a bee in your bonnet that you want to do a long distance endurance event, like a marathon or a century bike ride, something like that, they're very fun. You do have to exercise for longer than 60 minutes to acquire the ability to do the task. And when I say this, sometimes people get this really funny look on their faces, but I want you to know that every year, at least one of our patients does their first marathon. We all used to do Portland together, and now we'll be able to do Eugene, because now we have them here in Eugene. As a matter of fact, I did my first marathon in 1997, and when I did my marathon, one of our patients passed me. Did not make me happy. But anyway, and when I did my marathon, there was a lady who was in her 80s who did it. And they let her start about an hour before we did. I finally passed her about mile 10, thank God. And she was just trucking along, 80 years old. So anybody can do it, but it does take specialized training. So if you do decide you'd like to do that, contact us about 5 months in advance of your event, and we will help you train. Okay? So, questions about exercise prescription? No? Okay, I want to talk about some other stuff.
Yeah. On note, if we decide to do 2 or 3 different types of exercise, is it better to alternate, say, exercise 1 on Monday, exercise B on Tuesday, so you're not doing the same sort of exercise?
So what the question is, I have to repeat it because of this.
Let's say biking and walking.
Yes, okay,
Is
yeah.
it better to alternate rather than biking the first 3 days of the week than
Okay.
walk the
Yeah.
last 4?
Let me just repeat the question because I've got this thing on the kit here. The question is about getting some variety in your program. And yes, I do recommend getting some variety in your program. And honestly, it doesn't really matter. Whatever you think is best. Certainly, if you could do a walking one day, biking another day, that's going to be less stress on those particular joints. But, for me, I walk and bike too, and I'm a fair weather biker. So if it's raining 3 days in a row, I'm walking 3 days in a row. I'm not going to bike in the rain. So, yeah, it just depends. I'd rather have you
I'll
rather.
bike in the rain, the snow and ice.
Yeah, I'd just rather have you do it than get stuck into a program like that. Okay, warm up and cool down. I hope that these concepts sound familiar to you. Warm up and cool down. Now, have you ever seen runners who grab their ankle and start doing this kind of thing? Are they warming up?
Stretching.
Right. These concepts, warm up and cool down, are cardiovascular concepts. I'm not talking about your muscles. We're talking about cardiovascular warm up and cool down. So for visual guys, here is your heart rate and blood pressure at rest. What we're talking about is gradually elevating your heart rate and blood pressure in warm up. Then you get to your aerobic zone. How are you going to know when you're in aerobic zone? How does it feel? Fairly light to somewhat hard, right? That's your aerobic zone. You maintain that steady state. That's your aerobic zone. And then after a period of time, you slowly and gradually reduce your heart rate and blood pressure and your cool down back to rest. So this is a visual of what happens to the cardiovascular system with exercise. It's also a visual of workload. You start from 0, you gradually increase the workload, hold it steady state, gradually decrease the workload. Okay? How many minutes do you believe is required to safely bring the heart rate and blood pressure from rest to your aerobic zone? How many minutes to safely elevate it up there? Well, here's another question. How many minutes are you guys warming up at home? Probably the better question, isn't it? Okay? Now the answer is 5 minutes. 5-minute warm-up, 5-minute cool-down, minimum. Minimum. And the reason I'm beating this to death is because this is what keeps exercise safe. There are sometimes terrible things that happen with exercise where people just crump over and die. And they've attributed the majority of those instances to an inadequate warm-up or cool-down. This keeps exercise safe. And as a matter of fact, for those of you who have taken a treadmill test, does this sound familiar? You're on the treadmill, working. The doctor says, okay, stop it. They stop it and wham, they sit you down immediately, or worse than that, lie you down in a bed. Did that happen? Now, why do you think they did that quickly? Were they trying to be nice to you? No. Because go, stop! Puts the most stress on your heart. They were trying to stress your heart. It's a stress test, okay? So you wouldn't want to do that to yourself. So the very worst thing in the world you could do is come in from your walk and plop yourself down on the couch and click on the remote control, okay? Cool down. And one of the things we've asked you all to do is to stretch after your exercise, right? And we've asked you to stretch after your exercise for 2 reasons. One is because you get more cluck for your buck in terms of flexibility, and it's a heck of a lot more comfortable when your muscles are warm. But 2, because we're trying to keep you actively moving for some period of time to lengthen your cool down time. Okay? So that's why we've done that. Warm up, 5 minutes. Cool down, 5 minutes. That should never change. Where you have flexibility is in your aerobic zone. This can be 20 to 60 minutes. Okay? That's where you have flexibility. How much time you have, how good you feel, whatever. These things are written in stone. Okay? Questions? All right. All this time, I have been talking about aerobic cardiovascular conditioning. I also want to talk just a second about fitness. And if we're going to talk about a totally, completely fit human, it's more than just cardiovascular conditioning. A totally fit human also has flexibility, range of motion in all their joints, and strength. And so we want to work on all parts of fitness, okay? Flexibility, stretching. Okay, now we've asked you all to stretch after your exercise. And truly, these stretches we're giving you, that's kind of like consider that the bare minimum of stretching you do on a daily basis. You may want to take yoga or Tai Chi or Pilates or getting a stretching tape or a video, something like that. Stretch. It will relieve tension and increase relaxation. It will prevent injuries. It will enhance performance. Incredibly important to maintain full range of motion in all your joints, everywhere. Okay? Stretching should be done every day, and preferably after your aerobic exercise when you're all warmed up. Strength training, lifting weights. There has been a resurgence of enthusiasm about weightlifting in the last several years, and you get 2 wonderful benefits from lifting weights. One is that you increase muscle mass. Remember we were talking about your body composition earlier? The more muscle you have, the better. Muscle is different than fat because muscle is what we call active metabolically. Your muscles burn calories 24/7. Okay? Fat doesn't do that. Fat just lays there. Okay? But muscles burn calories. So the more muscular you are, the easier it is to lose weight and maintain weight loss. Muscle. We love it. We love it. And you're going to increase your muscle mass by lifting weights. The second wonderful benefit is that when you lift weights, your muscle contracts and pulls on your bone and stresses your bone and makes your bones more dense. It strengthens bones. So who should be lifting weights more than anybody? Women. That's right. That's right. Incredibly important for us, okay? And for all people as we age. Now, the kind of weightlifting we're talking about is not slapping on the weight belt, putting on the gloves, and doing a maximum lift. We're not talking about that kind of weightlifting. The weightlifting we're advocating is what we call lighter weight, higher rep, which means that you lift a weight that you can lift 10 to 15 times a couple of sets. 10 to 15 times. So you're all going to be taught individually how to lift weights. And we might put a weight in your hand and you'll say, bah, this is nothing. But wait till you've lifted it 30 times before you tell me it's nothing. Okay? That's the kind of thing we're talking about. When we see people lift enormous amounts of weight, their blood pressures really, really go up. You know, we've seen blood pressures of, 400, 300, 400. So we don't want to see that. Okay? We're not going to have that with the lighter weight, higher rep thing. Okay? What else? Also, weightlifting is not done every day. You have to have a day of rest in between to let the muscles repair themselves. So the very most often you'd want to do weightlifting is every other day. And the research has shown twice a week is all you need. Twice a week. Okay? So we will start weightlifting with you. If you are maybe halfway through the program, you've not lifted weights, please request that because we want to get you on a good weightlifting program. Okay? So aerobic cardiovascular conditioning done how many days a week?
7.
Stretching, flexibility, range of motion, how many days a week?
7.
7. Weight training?
2.
2.
3.
2 or 3. Yeah, so it's not a huge amount of your time. Okay, I want to cover a couple more things. I'm cutting into my sex time, or your sex time, actually. In terms of eating and drinking, eating or exercising after eating, how long do you think you should wait? What'd your mom tell you? You couldn't go swimming till how long after lunch?
An hour.
An hour. An hour. Yes. Digestion takes about 30% of your cardiac output. That's a lot. So you wouldn't want to put exercise on top of a big meal. So do wait at least an hour after a meal before you exercise. In terms of drinking, the very most wonderful thing to drink with exercise is water. Yes. Cool water is best. It's absorbed into your gut most readily, not real hot or not real cold. And if you absolutely hate water, you can dilute it a little bit. Like some of these sport drinks, you just don't need it that much. They're too concentrated. But water is absolutely best. What are the 2 worst things to drink with exercise?
Caffeine.
Caffeine. Caffeine. Anything that has caffeine in it. What does caffeine do to heart rate and blood pressure? Elevates it, right? What does exercise do to heart rate and blood pressure? That's a double whammy on your cardiovascular system. I'm not telling you to stop drinking caffeine. I'm just saying don't do it before exercise. Okay? And the other thing, of course, is alcohol for the obvious reasons. Years and years ago when people used to run 10K road races, they'd cross the finish line, they were handed a beer. Can you imagine how unhealthy that was? Fun, but unhealthy. So you don't want to do that. Weather. The 2 temperatures you need to be aware of, real cold, real hot. The real cold we're calling 35. If it's less than 35, not a good idea to go out and exercise. However, when it's cold, you can still exercise outdoors if you think about this principle, constant body temperature. How do you achieve that? Layering. Cover up your head, cover up your hands. That's 50% of your heat loss. You go through your warm-up, your hat comes off, your gloves go off, your jacket goes around your waist. Cool down, jacket goes on, hat goes on, gloves go on, and you've maintained a constant body temperature. It's okay, hi. Okay. So that's how you do it. Heat. 80 is the upper limit of going outside when it's healthy. Okay, so on those days in summertime when it is over 80 degrees, when do you exercise?
Late evening, early morning.
There you go. Or what a wonderful reason to join a gym. Joining a gym is a great thing because when you join a gym, you can exercise when it's hot, cold, wet, dry, freezing, raining. It doesn't matter. It takes away all excuses. You can exercise still. So that's a good thing to do. That's it. Do you have any questions about exercise before I get into sex?
What happens if you
Joining
exercise when it's too hot?
It can put you up for heat exhaustion or heat stroke.
So just keep plenty of liquid going in and
Yeah,
make
do not
sure
do
you're
not
still sweating.
yeah, do not go if it's over 80.
What about joining the gym here? What is that?
I'll explain that later. Yeah, and that's always an option for you. Okay, now I want to talk about sex, and people get a little giggly about this, but we've discovered in our research that after a cardiac event, 1 in 3 couples has a fear of resuming their sexual relationship. That's a lot. That's a lot. And the fears around this, some of them are appropriate fears, and some of them are totally wacko, old wives' tales, not true. So I want to go over some of the fears and some of the recommendations for sexual activity. The number one misconception, perhaps, is that sexual activity is a lot of work, a lot of stress on the heart. And it's not. It's not. They've actually studied this, if you can believe that. And what we found out is in terms of the cardiovascular load, it's similar to walking a couple of blocks. That's it. So if you are capable of walking a couple of blocks without being too fatigued or without getting symptoms, that's all the work that's involved. So please don't be afraid of the work. It's not a lot of work. The number one fear, frankly, is death. People are afraid that somebody's going to die. That's called sudden cardiac death. It does happen during exercise. It does happen during sex. It happens when people are sitting at their desk. But the reality is, when you look at all of the incidences of sudden cardiac death that occur in 1 year, do you know only 1% has occurred with sex? It's very, very, very rare. And the other thing you need to know about that statistic, out of the 1% that's died during sex, do you know that 70% of those were extramarital? So what does that tell you? Little guilt, maybe. Okay. So yeah, no messing around. If you stay with your appropriate partner, you're not going to die. Okay. So just consider that. There are some fears, though, that are appropriate. And one of them is to bring on angina, to have chest pain, which could happen. The other thing is to hurt the sternal wound. For those of you who've had surgery, that could happen. So in the beginning of your recovery, not for the rest of your life, but in the beginning of your recovery, the very best sexual position for the patient is on their back. Let your partner get on top. Let them do all the work. You just lay there and enjoy yourself. And it's very little work for the heart. It's not going to bring on angina, and it won't hurt your sternal wound. If you hate doing it on your back, or you can't for some reason, try patient on their side. And again, will probably not bring on angina and shouldn't hurt that sternal wound. Okay? The positions you want to avoid in the beginning, not for the rest of your life, but just in the beginning, are any positions that use a lot of arms. Now, what happens to heart rate and blood pressure with arm work? Goes way up, way exaggerated response. And you can imagine what would happen to that sternal wound if you were leaning on your arms real hard or holding your partner in the air. That could pop your wires. So don't do that in the beginning. Wait till you heal up. Okay? There are other reasons why patients sometimes hold back on resuming their sexual relationship. And that is, again, that wonderful drug we talked about earlier, beta blocker. Okay? Beta blockers have side effects. For 15% of people who take beta blockers, they have sexual side effects. For men, they become impotent. They can't have an erection. For women, it can decrease vaginal lubrication. For both men and women, it can erase your libido, so you have no desire at all. It happens to 15% of people who take beta blockers. And you know what? We don't know who you are. And we always hope whenever we give you any medication, you're going to tolerate it well, without side effects. But if that pill is doing that to you and that's a problem for you, get it changed. You're not stuck with any medication you're taking. And I promise you, no doctor would give that to you knowing that was going to happen to you. So if you're having a problem, call your doctor. We just need to try a new recipe. And if you're embarrassed about that, I'll call your doctor for you. I'm not embarrassed about that. You know, the whole point of taking medicines is to improve the quality of our life. So if any drug is giving you an unacceptable side effect, let's get it changed. Okay? The very last reason couples sometimes hold back from resuming the relationship has to do with your partner. And I want to put in some support for the partners of patients. Please, patients, understand that your partners have been placed in a position they may have never been in before in terms of their relationship with you. Your partners are watching what you eat and what you drink and the color of your skin. Your partners are laying awake at night listening to you breathe. They are doing that. And they're doing that because that's normal. They all do that. But when a partner is in that real kind of hyper-vigilant place of watching and caring for you, it's often very difficult for them to relax enough to feel sexy. So give them a break. Give them some space. They are going to get used to this. Okay? They will. But everybody needs their own time. And the partners need to know something about being a patient. For most of the people who are patients, they've never been a heart patient before. This is new to them too. And I tell you, to be a patient and receive constant, "Are you okay? How are you feeling? Should you be doing that?" La 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 la, can be really frustrating for patients. It can be. And it can even make them mad. And if they're mad, there's not going to be any sex. So everybody take a breath. You know, everything will calm down. I promise it will get better. And when both of you are ready and receptive to do this, you treat it just like exercise. That's why we're talking about it now. It follows the exact same rules, meaning that you don't want to do it if you're already tired from another activity, just like exercise. You don't want to do it right after a full meal, just like exercise. Not right after drinking a whole bunch of coffee or liquor, just like exercise. Okay? Make sure that you get yourself into a comfortable position. In the beginning, try patient on their back, patient on their side. Make sure you're in a comfortable environment. So the very first time, don't do it on the kitchen table. Okay? And if you stay with your appropriate partner, you're not going to die. Okay? And if you're not ready for this yet, or if sexual intercourse isn't part of your relationship anymore, please, please don't forget about touch. There is something healing that happens to people when they're touched. So touching is a good thing to do. Okay? Any questions about this? Thank you.